She was just a human recruit, reaches its stunning climax when smugglers unleash a bioweapon to trigger a planet-wide predator hunt. Mira Langston stands alone between a wounded young Arcturus and a converging horde of apex predators. Using her improvised sound device, she broadcasts a dominance call that stops the deadly creatures in their tracks, transforming an enemy species into an unprecedented ally. The rain came down in sheets, pounding against the reinforced polymer dome of Outpost Meridian. Corporal Mira Langston pressed her palm against the transparent barrier, feeling the vibrations of each massive droplet. 6 months on Volterra 9, and she still hadn't grown accustomed to the sheer violence of its weather patterns. "Enjoying the view, human?" Lieutenant Soralis's gravelly voice cut through her reverie. The Xanthian's craggy, blue-tinged skin glistened under the artificial lights as he approached. 4 eyes narrowed with what Mira had learned to recognize as suspicion. "Sir," she straightened, pulling her hand away from the dome. "Just observing the storm patterns. They're different from Earth's." "Everything here is different from Earth," Soralis said, the flanges along his throat flaring slightly. "That's why most of your species wash out within the first month. The Coalition didn't exactly celebrate when humans petitioned to join." Mira bit back her retort. 6 years since humanity had been grudgingly admitted to the Interstellar Defense Coalition. And still, the older species treated them like children who'd snuck into an adults-only gathering. She was one of only 8 humans stationed at Outpost Meridian, and the only one assigned to active patrol duties. 0500 tomorrow, Soralis continued. "Perimeter sweep, Western Quadrant. Try not to get yourself killed. The paperwork is extensive." "Yes, sir," Mira replied, keeping her voice neutral despite the sting. As Soralis stalked away, she turned back to the storm. Beyond the rain-lashed dome, the jungle canopy thrashed in the wind, occasional flashes of bioluminescence betraying the movements of nocturnal predators. In her quarters that night, Mira reviewed the station's xenobiology database for the 1,000th time. Her small room was Spartan. A bunk, a desk, and a wall of survival gear carefully arranged according to regulations. She'd added only 2 personal touches: a faded photograph of her grandparents' farm in Montana and a small potted fern native to Volterra 9 that Dr. Halvix, the station's xenobiologist, had assured her was non-toxic. The holographic display flickered as she scrolled through images of Volterra's most dangerous fauna. Sulfurnix boars with their diamond-hard tusks and acidic saliva, skulk-spine serpents that could mimic the sounds of their prey's offspring, and, at the apex, the Arcturus. The display showed only blurred images captured at extreme distances, along with a simple warning: engage stealth protocols, retreat if possible, survival unlikely if encountered. Sleep came fitfully, filled with dreams of being hunted through endless jungles by shadows with too many eyes. The morning arrived with Volterra's characteristic abruptness, darkness to full daylight in under 20 minutes as the binary stars crested the horizon. Mira joined her squad at the airlock, checking her gear methodically: standard issue pulse rifle, emergency beacon, medkit, water purifier, and the small sound modulator she'd been tinkering with during off hours. Expecting to give a speech, Langston, Private Tarek, a lanky Plavian with silvery skin, gestured toward the sound device with one of his 3 upper limbs. "Just an experiment," she replied, securing it to her belt. The device was little more than a modified communications unit, but she'd programmed it with a library of Volterran animal calls. Sometimes understanding the language of predators was more useful than being able to shoot them. Lieutenant Soralis arrived last, his exoskeleton armor gleaming. "Squad, attention." The 6 soldiers, 4 Xanthians like himself, the Plavian Tarek, and Mira, snapped to order. "Western Quadrant has reported anomalous readings near Sensor Cluster 7. Probably just wildlife interference. but command wants eyes on it. Standard sweep pattern. Weapons hot, but safety's on. This is observation only. His gaze lingered on Mira. Some of you still need to learn that distinction. The airlock cycled open, and humid jungle air flooded in, carrying the complex aromas of alien vegetation and decay. They moved out in formation, Mira taking the right flank position as they entered the jungle. Volterra 9's equatorial forest was a riot of color and sound. Massive trees with trunks wider than shuttlecraft supported a canopy hundreds of meters above. Between ground level and the distant ceiling stretched layer upon layer of intermediate growth. Vines as thick as a human torso, fern-like plants with fronds the size of glider wings, and countless species of epiphytes that erupted in brilliant blooms of ultraviolet and infrared. To non-augmented human eyes like Mira's, these appeared as subtle glows at the edges of perception. They advanced at a steady pace. The squad's movements practiced despite the challenging terrain. Sensor readings from their armor fed continuous data back to base. Atmospheric composition, biological signatures, terrain stability. 2 hours into the patrol, they approached Sensor Cluster 7, a collection of monitoring equipment nestled in the fork of a massive tree. Readings normal now, Seralis muttered, checking his wrist display. Could have been. A high-pitched squeal interrupted him, followed by the sound of splintering wood. Through the undergrowth, a massive shape charged toward them, a sulphurnix boar, nearly 3 meters at the shoulder, its tusks leaving smoking furrows in the vegetation as acidic saliva dripped from its jaws. "Defensive positions!" Seralis barked, raising his weapon. The squad scattered to predetermined positions, all except Private Norax, who stumbled on a root and went down hard. Mira saw it happen as if in slow motion. Norax falling, the boar changing course toward the fallen Xanthian. Seralis shouting something she couldn't quite hear over the pounding of her heart. Without conscious thought, she was moving, diving between the fallen soldier and the charging beast. "Hey!" she shouted, firing a warning shot that sizzled past the boar's flank. The creature hesitated for just a moment, its 6 eyes swiveling toward her. That was all the opening she needed. Mira activated her sound modulator, cranking the volume to maximum as it emitted the resonant growl of a juvenile Arcturus. The effect was immediate. The boar reared back, its segmented ears flattening against its skull. It pawed the ground once, twice, then turned and crashed away through the undergrowth. Silence fell, broken only by Norax's labored breathing. Mira turned to offer him a hand up, only to find herself staring down the barrel of Seralis's pulse rifle. "What part of observation only escaped your understanding, Corporal?" the lieutenant hissed, his secondary eyelids flickering in agitation. "Sir, Private Norax was—" "I gave explicit orders. You disobeyed them, endangered the mission, and possibly attracted every predator within 5 kilometers with that device." He gestured dismissively at her modulator. "With respect, sir, the boar was charging. If I hadn't intervened—" "If you hadn't intervened, we would have handled it according to protocol," Seralis snapped. "This isn't your first patrol. Langston, you know the procedures." Private Tarek helped Norax to his feet. The injured Xanthian's exoskeleton had a visible crack along one segment, but he seemed otherwise unhurt. "Sir," Norax said quietly, "the human's actions, while against protocol, did prevent more serious injury." Seralis's throat flanges expanded in what Mira recognized as the Xanthian equivalent of an exasperated sigh. "We'll discuss this at base. Maintain formation, and no more heroics. That's an order." The return journey passed in tense silence. Back at Outpost Meridian, Mira expected to be formally reprimanded, possibly even reassigned to non-combat duties. Instead, she found herself summoned to the command center, where Seralis stood with Commander Vex, the station's imposing Dracalian leader. "Corporal Langston," Vex rumbled, her scaled head tilting to study Mira with compound eyes that reflected the room's lights like prisms. Lieutenant Seralis has filed an incident report regarding today's patrol. Yes, Commander, Mira replied, standing at rigid attention. He notes that you disobeyed direct orders and employed an unauthorized device in the field. Vex's mandibles clicked softly. He also notes that your quick thinking likely saved Private Norax from serious injury and prevented a potentially lethal confrontation with local fauna. Mira blinked in surprise, glancing at Seralis, who studiously avoided her gaze. The Interstellar Defense Coalition values initiative, Corporal, but also discipline. You will report to the Quartermaster to surrender your modified communication device for evaluation, and you will spend the next 3 cycles assisting Dr. Halvix with his research. Perhaps you can channel your apparent interest in Volterran wildlife into something productive. Yes, Commander, Mira replied, struggling to keep the relief from her voice. Dismissed. Outside the command center, Seralis fell into step beside her. For several moments, they walked in silence through the station's curved corridors. That device, he finally said. The sound modulator. You built it yourself? Yes, sir. From spare parts. And the Arcturus call? Where did you get that sample? No one on this base has ever recorded one up close. Mira hesitated. I extrapolated, sir. Based on recordings of distant calls and the vocal anatomy diagrams in the xenobiology database. Seralis stopped walking, all 4 eyes fixed on her. You guessed. I made an educated approximation, she corrected. The frequency patterns of apex predators across different worlds show remarkable similarities. And it worked, Seralis interrupted. That's the only reason you're not on the next transport back to Earth. Remember that, Corporal. He stalked away, leaving Mira standing alone in the corridor. The next morning, Mira reported to the xenobiology lab as ordered. The circular chamber was a stark contrast to the military precision of the rest of the base. Workbenches cluttered with specimens, walls covered in holographic displays of ecological data, and the distinctive earthy smell of soil samples and plant extracts. Dr. Halvix glanced up from a microscope as she entered. The human scientist was in his 60s, with a shock of white hair and the deeply tanned skin of someone who spent more time in the field than in labs. Ah, Corporal Langston, he said, his voice carrying the slight lilt of someone who had grown up speaking multiple languages. My new assistant. I have heard quite a bit about you. Sir, she replied, unsure whether to stand at attention or relax. Halvix waved a hand dismissively. None of that military stiffness in here. Please. This is a place of science, not salutes. He gestured to a nearby stool. Sit. Tell me about this sound device you created. For the next hour, Mira explained her work on the modulator, from its initial conception to the programming of various animal calls. Halvix listened intently, occasionally interrupting with sharp questions about frequency ranges and modulation patterns. Fascinating, he said when she finished. Absolutely fascinating. You have no formal training in xenobiology? No, sir. Just the standard briefings all personnel receive. And, well, I've been studying the station database in my free time. Halvix tapped his fingers against the workbench. Well, punishment or not, I think your reassignment will be beneficial to my research. I've been preparing for a field expedition to the eastern valleys. The recent storms have exposed new terrain features, and preliminary drone surveillance suggests increased Arcturus activity in the area. Mira couldn't hide her surprise. You're studying the Arcturus directly? I thought station protocol classified them as extreme risk fauna. Oh, they are, Halvix agreed cheerfully. Most lethal predator on the planet. Possibly the most dangerous non-sentient species in this sector of the galaxy. That's what makes them so fascinating. He picked up a data tablet and swiped through several blurry images. Intelligent pack hunters with problem-solving abilities that rival some coalition species. Adaptive camouflage. Sensory organs we still don't fully understand. He handed her the tablet. And completely misunderstood. The coalition has been on Volterra 9 for 20 years, and in that time, there have been 17 confirmed Arcturus attacks on personnel. Do you know how many were unprovoked? Mira scrolled through the incident reports. According to this, none, sir. Exactly, Halvix beamed at her. Every single attack followed either an intrusion into nesting territory or threatening behavior toward juveniles. They're not mindless killers. They're apex predators with complex social structures and territorial imperatives. He took the tablet back. Your sound modulator may have unlocked a key component of their communication system. If we can develop that further. Dr. Halvix, a new voice interrupted. Mira turned to see Lieutenant Siralis standing in the doorway, his posture rigid. A word? The two men stepped outside, but Mira could still hear their conversation through the open door. You cannot seriously be considering taking her on a field expedition, Siralis said, his voice low but intense. On the contrary, Halvix replied calmly. I'm absolutely serious. Corporal Langston has demonstrated precisely the kind of innovative thinking my research needs. She's undisciplined, reckless. She saved one of your soldiers yesterday. By disobeying direct orders. Sometimes the most valuable discoveries come from coloring outside the lines. Lieutenant. Halvix's tone remained pleasant but firm. Besides, Commander Vex has already approved the expedition. We leave tomorrow at first light. You're welcome to assign additional security if you're concerned. When Halvix returned to the lab, his expression gave nothing away. Now, Corporal, let's discuss preparation for tomorrow's expedition. I hope you're not afraid of a little hiking. The next morning found Mira standing at the eastern airlock with Dr. Halvix and a 4-person security detail, led by none other than Lieutenant Siralis himself. The Xanthian looked as displeased as his alien features allowed, checking and rechecking his equipment with pointed thoroughness. The eastern valleys are approximately 12 kilometers from the outpost, Halvix explained, spreading a topographical map across a cargo container. Our primary objective is to locate and observe Arcturus in their natural habitat, without disturbing them. Secondary objectives include collecting biological samples from the new terrain features and updating our ecological surveys. And our objective, Siralis cut in, is to ensure you don't get yourselves killed in the process. We'll maintain standard patrol formation. Dr. Halvix, you will remain in the center of the formation at all times. Langston, you'll stay with him. Actually, Halvix interjected, I'd like Corporal Langston to operate as our forward scout. Her sound modulator, which I've taken the liberty of rebuilding and enhancing, may give us advance warning of predator activity. Siralis's throat flanges flared in obvious irritation, but he merely said, Fine. Langston on point, but no more than 50 meters ahead of the main group, and constant communication. The journey through the jungle was arduous. Volterra 9's high gravity made every step more taxing than it would have been on Earth, and the humidity seemed to coat Mira's lungs with each breath. Still, she moved confidently, her enhanced sound modulator clipped to her shoulder harness, continuously sampling and analyzing the forest's acoustic patterns. By midday, they had reached the edge of the eastern valleys, a series of steep, forested ravines carved by ancient rivers. The recent storms had caused landslides in several areas, exposing layers of soil and rock that hadn't seen daylight in centuries. Perfect, Halvix murmured, scanning the new terrain with his binoculars. Fresh territory means fresh scent markers. If there are Arcturus in the area, they'll be investigating these changes to their hunting grounds. Mira's modulator emitted a soft chirp, and she held up a hand to halt the group. Movement ahead, she whispered into her comm. Multiple signatures, approximately 200 meters down valley. moving slowly. "Identification?" Seralis demanded. She adjusted the modulator's settings, filtering out ambient sounds. Profile matches. Skulk spine serpents. A cluster of them. Maybe 5 or 6 individuals. "Change course," Seralis ordered immediately. "We'll skirt the eastern ridge instead." "Wait," Halvik said, excitement evident in his voice. "Skulk spines rarely hunt in groups that large unless they're being driven. Something's pushing them out of their territory." "All the more reason to avoid the area," Seralis argued. "Or all the more reason to investigate carefully," Halvix countered. "Corporal Langston, can your device detect any other large fauna in the vicinity?" Mira adjusted the settings again, expanding the range. "There's something. At the extreme edge of detection range. Large body mass, moving deliberately rather than randomly. Could be an Arcturus, but I can't be certain at this distance." Halvix's eyes lit up. "Perfect. We'll maintain a safe distance from the skulk spines, but move parallel to their course. They may lead us straight to what we're looking for." Seralis looked like he wanted to object, but instead turned to his security team. "Weapons hot. Defensive formation. If those serpents come within 50 meters, we retreat immediately. Understood?" They continued down the valley, moving from cover to cover with practiced stealth. The skulk spines remained ahead of them, their long, segmented bodies occasionally visible, slithering through the underbrush. True to their name, rows of razor-sharp spines ran along their backs, rising and falling with their agitation. Mira kept her attention divided between the modulator's readings and the visual scanning of their surroundings. Something about the serpent's behavior troubled her. They were moving too purposefully, almost as if... "Trap!" she hissed suddenly, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "Lieutenant, they're circling back." Even as she spoke, the skulk spines changed direction with unnatural synchronicity, cutting through the dense vegetation to flank their position. "Defensive circle!" Seralis shouted. "Halvix, center position!" The security team moved with practiced efficiency, forming a protective ring around the scientist. Mira raised her pulse rifle, tracking the sinuous movement of the nearest serpent through her sights. The creature was enormous, at least 8 meters from head to tail, with a skull the size of a human torso. "Don't fire unless they attack," Halvix called out, his scientific curiosity apparently undimmed by the danger. "They're displaying unusual coordination. I want to observe." His words cut off as the first skulk spine lunged from the underbrush, jaws gaping to reveal 3 rows of backward-curving teeth. One of the security team fired, the pulse blast catching the creature mid-leap and sending it crashing into the vegetation. Before anyone could react, 2 more serpents attacked from opposite directions. Chaos erupted. The security team fired in disciplined bursts, but the skulk spines moved with uncanny speed, their armored hides deflecting glancing shots. Mira found herself separated from the group, backing against a massive tree trunk as a particularly large specimen circled her, its pupilless eyes fixed on her movements. In the midst of the firefight, she noticed something strange. The skulk spines weren't attacking randomly. They were herding the team, driving them toward the edge of a steep ravine, and they were communicating, using a series of clicks and hisses that her modulator was struggling to decode. An idea struck her. If they could communicate, perhaps they could be deceived. Mira activated her modulator, cycling quickly through its library of predator calls until she found what she needed: the territorial roar of a mature sulfurnix boar, natural enemy of the skulk spines. She amplified the sound to maximum volume and broadcast it directly at the serpent confronting her. The effect was instantaneous. The creature reared back, its spines flattening in what could only be fear. Mira didn't waste the opportunity, quickly programming a sequence of different predator calls: sulfurnix, canopy stalker, marsh titan, and broadcasting them in rapid succession. "Cover your ears!" she shouted to the team, then triggered the sequence. The cacophony of predator calls echoed through the valley, a discordant symphony of Volterra's most feared hunters. The skulkspines reacted with near panic, their coordinated attack dissolving as they scattered in different directions, disappearing into the undergrowth as quickly as they had appeared. Silence fell, broken only by the heavy breathing of the team and the distant calls of disturbed avians. "Is everyone all right?" Siralis demanded, scanning his team. Aside from minor cuts and one security officer with a more serious gash along his arm, they had escaped relatively unharmed. "That," Halvik said, staring at Mira with undisguised admiration, "was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. You intuited their communication patterns and created a counter-strategy on the fly." "It was just an educated guess," Mira replied, still scanning the jungle warily. "They were too coordinated for individual hunters. They had to be communicating somehow. And that's not all," Halvix continued excitedly. "Those weren't natural hunting behaviors. Skulkspines are ambush predators. They don't herd prey. Something was directing them. Or someone," Siralis added grimly, examining the jungle floor. "Look here." He pointed to a small metallic object, half buried in the soil. "Sonic emitter, military grade. Someone was controlling those serpents." Mira felt a chill that had nothing to do with the valley shadows. "We need to report this to command immediately." "Agreed," Siralis said, rising. "Expedition terminated. We return to base now." "Lieutenant," Halvix protested, "we haven't even—" "Someone just tried to kill us, Doctor," Siralis cut him off. "Using controlled wildlife as a weapon. That takes precedence over your research." As they gathered their equipment for the return journey, Mira's modulator emitted a soft alert. She glanced down at the readout and froze. "Lieutenant," she said quietly, "we have company. Large biosignature, approaching from the North Ridge. Movement pattern consistent with stalking behavior." Siralis signaled for silence, his experienced gaze sweeping the ridgeline. For several long moments, nothing moved. Then, between one heartbeat and the next, a shadow detached itself from the jungle's edge. The Arcturus stood on the ridge like a statue carved from midnight. Nearly 3 meters at the shoulder, its 6-limbed body combined the power of a terrestrial big cat with the fluid grace of something wholly alien. Its hide shifted colors subtly, adapting to the dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy. But it was the creature's head that commanded attention, triangular, with 3 pairs of eyes set in a formation that allowed for perfect depth perception and a near 360-degree field of vision. Its mouth, when it opened slightly to taste the air, revealed double rows of serrated teeth. "Nobody move," Halvix whispered, his voice barely audible. "It's a juvenile male. Probably displaced from its pack recently." "How can you tell?" Mira breathed, unable to tear her gaze from the magnificent predator. "The crest isn't fully developed, and the limb proportions indicate adolescence. If it were fully mature, we wouldn't have seen it until it was on us." The Arcturus remained motionless, its multiple eyes scanning their group with unsettling intelligence. Then, with deliberate slowness, it began to descend the ridge, powerful limbs finding purchase on the steep slope with effortless precision. "Weapons ready," Siralis ordered softly. "If it charges, aim for the primary eyes." "Wait," Halvik said. "It's not displaying aggressive behavior. Look at the posture, relaxed shoulders, open stance. It's curious." "Curious predators still have teeth, Doctor," Siralis replied tensely. The Arcturus reached the valley floor, still maintaining its distance. It circled them slowly, head tilted in what seemed like contemplation. When it completed a full circuit, it stopped directly in front of Mira. Time seemed to stretch as human and alien predator regarded each other. The Arcturus's multiple eyes blinked in sequence, and its head tilted further. Then, to everyone's astonishment, it made a sound, a soft, trilling purr that Mira's modulator immediately captured and analyzed. "It's greeting me," she whispered, glancing at the modulator's readout. Impossible, Seralis murmured. They don't interact non-aggressively with other species. The Arcturus took a step forward. Seralis and his team tensed, weapons tracking the movement. But Mira raised a hand. Don't, she said. I think I understand. Following instinct, more than reason, she activated her modulator and played back the Arcturus's call, slightly modified to lower the pitch, a response that, according to the device's analysis, might convey non-threatening acknowledgement. The predator's reaction was immediate. Its upper limbs shifted position, and it made another sound, this one more complex. The modulator struggled to analyze it, finally suggesting, territorial query, non-aggressive challenge. It's asking if we're invading its territory, Halvix translated in wonder. Mira, try. Before he could finish, the Arcturus's posture changed dramatically. It dropped into a crouch, all 6 eyes suddenly focused on something behind their group. A growl like distant thunder emanated from its throat. Down! Mira shouted, as a pulse blast sizzled through the air where she had been standing a moment before. From the jungle emerged 4 figures in unmarked combat armor, weapons trained on the expedition team. Their leader stepped forward, his helmet retracting to reveal a human face with cold eyes and a calculating smile. Well, he said, voice carrying easily across the clearing. Outpost personnel and an Arcturus, all in one convenient location. This simplifies things considerably. Who are you? Seralis demanded, his own weapon raised. This is a restricted research zone under Coalition protection. Let's just say we represent interests that find the Coalition's monopoly on Volterra 9's unique biological resources. Inconvenient. The man gestured, and his companions spread out, flanking the group. The skulk spines were supposed to drive you toward our ambush point, but your quick thinking with those sound calls disrupted the plan. Impressive improvisation. Mira noticed the Arcturus hadn't fled. Instead, it remained in its crouched position, eyes tracking the new arrivals with predatory focus. You were controlling the serpents, she said, trying to keep the armed figure's attention on her and away from the increasingly tense Arcturus. With sonic emitters? The leader smiled coldly. Crude but effective technology. Nothing compared to what we've developed for the Arcturus. Though, he raised a small device. This little transmitter broadcasts synthetic pheromones that trigger their hunting instincts. One press, and every Arcturus within 50 kilometers will converge on this location in a frenzy. Halvix's face paled. You're insane. That would disrupt the entire ecosystem, and you'd be just as dead as the rest of us. Oh, we have countermeasures, the man replied dismissively. The same can't be said for Outpost Meridian. Our main transmitter is already in place near your base. Once activated, the resulting Arcturus swarm will overwhelm your defenses within hours. What do you want? Seralis asked, his voice tight with controlled fury. Access. Withdrawal of Coalition forces. Exclusive rights to Volterra's pharmaceutical potential. The leader shrugged. But, for now, I'll settle for your equipment and samples. Consider it a down payment. Mira's mind raced. The standoff couldn't last. The moment either side opened fire, chaos would erupt. And then there was the Arcturus, still tensed like a coiled spring, waiting for a signal. Her fingers moved subtly to her sound modulator, programming a sequence based on the calls she'd recorded. If her theory was correct. I don't think you understand the situation, she said, voice steady despite her pounding heart. You're not just facing us. The leader's expression hardened. I don't respond well to threats, especially from junior officers on research duty. It's not a threat, Mira replied, activating the modulator. It's a translation. The device emitted a complex series of growls and clicks, a modified version of the Arcturus's earlier vocalization, but with subtle alterations that her analysis suggested might convey aggression and territorial defense. The young Arcturus's reaction was immediate and devastating. It launched itself toward the nearest armored figure with impossible speed, all 6 limbs propelling it in a blur of motion. The man barely had time to turn before 300 kilograms of apex predator slammed into him, powerful jaws clamping around his helmet with enough force to crack the reinforced material. Chaos erupted. The remaining smugglers opened fire, their shots dividing between the outpost team and the rampaging Arcturus. Siralis and his security detail responded with disciplined volleys, forcing the attackers to take cover. "Halvix, stay down!" Mira shouted, pulling the scientist behind a fallen log as pulse blasts scorched the air above them. The Arcturus was a whirlwind of destruction, moving from one smuggler to the next with terrifying efficiency. Despite taking several glancing hits, its adaptive hide seemed to absorb or deflect the energy, allowing it to continue its assault. In the confusion, the smuggler leader made a break for higher ground, the pheromone transmitter clutched in his hand. Mira saw his intention immediately. He was going to trigger the device, regardless of the consequences. "Cover me!" she called to Siralis, then sprinted after the fleeing man, zigzagging to avoid weapons fire. The smuggler reached a rocky outcropping and turned, his weapon trained on her. "Stop right there," he ordered. "One more step and I activate the transmitter." Mira raised her hands slowly. "Think about what you're doing. You trigger that device, and you die too. Your countermeasures won't hold against a full swarm." "Maybe," he acknowledged with a cold smile. "But Outpost Meridian definitely falls. A worthy trade." "Why? What's worth that kind of destruction?" The man's expression hardened. "Do you have any idea what Volterra's biochemistry is worth on the open market? The Coalition hoards it all for themselves, distributing access based on political favors. My employers simply want to democratize the resource. By unleashing an ecological disaster, by demonstrating that the Coalition can't maintain exclusive control." He raised the transmitter. "Enough talk." Before he could activate the device, a shadow detached itself from the rocks behind him. The Arcturus moved in absolute silence, its adaptive camouflage rendering it nearly invisible until the moment it struck. The smuggler screamed as powerful jaws closed around his arm, the transmitter falling from suddenly nerveless fingers. Mira lunged forward, snatching the device from the ground as the predator dragged the struggling man away from the edge. Despite his armor, the Arcturus's strength was overwhelming, its multiple limbs pinning him with ease. "Call it off!" the man screamed, his bravado evaporating in the face of imminent death. "Use your sound thing! Call it off!" Mira studied the transmitter in her hand, then looked at the Arcturus. The predator had stopped its attack, holding the man immobile but alive, its multiple eyes fixed on her with unmistakable intelligence. "I don't think I need to," she said quietly. "I think it's waiting for a decision." The realization struck her with sudden clarity. The Arcturus hadn't attacked randomly. It had targeted the greatest threat first, then methodically eliminated the others, leaving the leader for last. And now it was waiting, as if seeking judgment. Siralis and the others arrived, weapons trained on both the captured smuggler and the Arcturus. "Langston," the lieutenant called. "Step away slowly." "It's okay," she replied, not taking her eyes from the predator. "It's not going to attack me." "You can't know that." "I think I can." She held up the transmitter. This is what it was after. The threat to its territory. She turned to Halvix, who was staring at the scene with undisguised fascination. "Doctor, you said they're intelligent, with complex social structures. What if they're more than that? What if they understand concepts like threats and alliances?" Halvix approached cautiously. "It's possible. There are precedents in other worlds, non-sentient species that nonetheless display proto-sapient behaviors. The capacity to recognize mutual enemies, to form temporary partnerships against common threats. The Arcturus made a low sound, its grip on the smuggler unwavering. Mira's modulator translated it as query, expectation, acting on instinct. She activated her own device and improvised a response, a series of tones that she hoped conveyed gratitude and assurance. The Arcturus tilted its head, processing the sounds. Then, with deliberate care, it released the smuggler and stepped back. "Secure him," Siralis ordered, and 2 security officers moved forward to bind the dazed man's hands. "The others?" Mira asked. "1 dead, 2 captured," Siralis reported. "We found their transport about half a kilometer north. And something else. Deployment plans for more pheromone transmitters around the entire outpost perimeter. This wasn't just a raid. It was the first stage of a coordinated attack." The Arcturus remained at the edge of the group, its posture now relaxed but alert. When Mira glanced its way, it made another soft, trilling sound. "I think," Halvik said slowly, "we've just made first contact with Volterra 9's dominant species. Not as equals, perhaps, but as mutually recognized powers." He turned to Mira, eyes bright with scientific excitement. "And you, Corporal, have somehow become our ambassador." The journey back to Outpost Meridian was tense but uneventful. The captured smugglers were secured in the center of their formation, while the Arcturus, to everyone's continued amazement, followed at a distance, occasionally disappearing into the jungle only to reappear ahead of them, as if scouting their path. "It's unprecedented," Halvix kept murmuring, recording every movement and vocalization of the creature. "Absolutely unprecedented. Cross-species cooperative behavior with no prior conditioning." "I'm more concerned about what awaits us at the outpost," Siralis replied grimly. "If these smugglers already deployed their main transmitter." "We've confiscated this one," Mira pointed out, the device secure in her pack. "Maybe we can use it to create a counter-signal." "Possibly," Halvix agreed. "But we'd need to understand the exact pheromone frequency it broadcasts, and without specialized equipment." "We have specialized equipment," Mira interrupted. "An idea forming. We have an Arcturus." Both men looked at her in surprise. "Think about it," she continued. "If the transmitter mimics Arcturus pheromones to trigger hunting behavior, who better to help us identify and counteract it than an actual Arcturus? Their sensory organs are probably attuned to subtle variations we can't even detect." Halvix's expression shifted from surprise to excitement. "Of course! We could use your modulator to establish basic communication parameters, then introduce the transmitter in a controlled setting to observe the response. If we can identify the specific triggers, we might be able to neutralize the main transmitter," Siralis finished, his tone reluctantly impressed. "It's risky, but given the alternative..." They reached the outpost by nightfall, the security perimeter lighting up as they approached. The sight of an Arcturus following calmly behind an expedition team caused immediate chaos among the watchtower guards. "Hold your fire!" Siralis shouted into his communicator. "The Predator is non-hostile. Repeat, non-hostile. Alert Commander Vex and prepare the containment chamber in Science Sector." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. The smugglers were taken into custody, their equipment confiscated for analysis. A search team was dispatched to locate the main pheromone transmitter based on the captured smugglers' information. And, in the outpost's largest laboratory, a young Arcturus paced the perimeter of a reinforced containment field, its multiple eyes tracking every movement of the scientists beyond the barrier. Commander Vex stood with Siralis, Halvix, and Mira at the observation console, her scaled features set in grim lines. "Let me be certain I understand," she said, voice rumbling in the resonant tones of her species. "Smugglers have planted a device that can summon every Arcturus on the continent to attack our outpost. You propose to neutralize this threat by communicating with this specimen using a modified communication device built by Corporal Langston. And furthermore, You believe this predator, the most lethal hunter on Volterra 9, has formed some kind of bond with the corporal. That's a concise summary, yes, Halvix replied. Vex's compound eyes reflected the room's lights as she turned to study Mira. Explain this bond, Corporal. Mira straightened under the commander's gaze. I wouldn't call it a bond exactly, Commander. More like mutual recognition. It understood that we faced a common enemy in the smugglers, and it chose to assist us. Now it's continuing that assistance by remaining here rather than fleeing. And you believe you can communicate with it meaningfully? To a limited extent, yes. My modulator can analyze and reproduce its vocalizations with enough accuracy to convey basic concepts. With Dr. Halvix's help, I think we can establish a rudimentary framework for testing the pheromone transmitter's effects. Vex was silent for a long moment, her alien features unreadable. Finally, she said, You have 12 hours. If you haven't made progress by then, we evacuate all non-essential personnel and prepare for defensive operations. The work began immediately. Halvix set up a comprehensive array of sensors around the containment field, while Mira worked to refine her modulator's translation algorithms based on the Arcturus's ongoing vocalizations. Seralis coordinated with the search teams, who reported finding evidence of the smugglers' camp, but not yet the main transmitter. It's remarkable, Halvix said, reviewing the preliminary data. The vocal range alone exceeds anything in our records. And look at these ultra-low frequency components. They're below the threshold of human hearing, but the modulator is picking them up. Mira nodded, studying the patterns on her display. I think they're using multiple communication channels simultaneously. Audible vocalizations combined with subsonic elements that carry different information, like speaking and signing at the same time. The Arcturus watched them work, occasionally making sounds that the modulator now translated with increasing confidence. Query, impatience. Territorial assertion. Warning, alertness. After several hours of calibration and testing, Mira felt ready to attempt real communication. She approached the containment field, the modulator held before her like an offering. I'm going to try something simple first, she told Halvix and the others, who had gathered to observe. Just a greeting and acknowledgement of its help. The predator rose from where it had been resting, moving to the edge of the field directly opposite her. Its multiple eyes blinked in sequence, focusing with unnerving intensity. Mira activated the modulator, which emitted a carefully constructed series of sounds, part vocalization, part subsonic vibration. The translation display showed gratitude, alliance against common threat, request for continued assistance. For a moment, the Arcturus remained motionless. Then, it responded with a complex pattern of sounds that the modulator struggled to parse before displaying. Acknowledgement, territorial defense, query about threat status. It wants to know if the threat to its territory has been neutralized, Halvix translated excitedly. It's actually engaging in a goal-oriented exchange. Mira programmed another response. Threat continues. Seeking method to neutralize larger threat. Request sensory assistance. This time, the Arcturus's reaction was immediate. It moved closer to the containment field, all 6 limbs shifting into what Mira had come to recognize as a posture of alertness. Its response came in a burst of sound that the modulator translated as agreement, predator alliance, show threat. I think we're ready to test the transmitter, Mira said, turning to Halvix. But we should be prepared for a strong reaction. Halvix nodded, adjusting the containment field settings. I've increased the strength by 300%. It should hold, even if it becomes agitated. Mira removed the confiscated transmitter from its sealed container, holding it up for the Arcturus to see, but not activating it. Through the modulator, she explained. Threat device. Creates false signals. Summons predators to wrong territory. The Arcturus studied the device, its head tilting in that now familiar gesture of consideration. It made a short, sharp sound that the modulator translated simply as, "Activate." "Are you sure this is wise?" Seralis asked, hand resting on his sidearm. "We need to understand how it works," Mira replied. "And we need the Arcturus's help to do that." She met the lieutenant's gaze steadily. "I believe it will remain cooperative." After a moment's hesitation, Seralis nodded. "Proceed, but at the first sign of aggression, we shut this down." Mira turned back to the containment field and activated the transmitter at its lowest setting. The device emitted no sound or light detectable to human senses, but the effect on the Arcturus was dramatic. It recoiled, all 6 limbs tensing as its hide shifted rapidly through various camouflage patterns. A low, rumbling growl emanated from its throat. "Modulator translation?" Halvix asked urgently. Mira checked the display. "It's complex. Multiple overlapping signals. False territory. False challenge. Deception. Trap. I think it recognizes the signal as artificial. Can it tell us how to counteract it?" She programmed another query. How to silence false signal. How to protect territory. The Arcturus paced the perimeter of the containment field, its movements agitated but controlled. Finally, it stopped and emitted a long, complex vocalization that the modulator translated in fragments. Dominant predator call. Territory secure. Pack leader assertion. "I think," Mira said slowly, "it's suggesting we broadcast a signal that mimics a dominant Arcturus marking secure territory, essentially telling other Arcturus that there's no threat and no need to respond to the false signal." Halvix was already adjusting instruments. "If we can record and analyze the exact pattern it's suggesting, we might be able to create a counter-broadcast powerful enough to neutralize the smuggler's transmitter." For the next several hours, they worked to refine the counter-signal, with the Arcturus patiently repeating its vocalizations as they adjusted their recording equipment. By the time Commander Vex returned for an update, they had a working prototype. "We believe this will work," Halvix reported, displaying the complex waveform pattern they had developed. "Based on the Arcturus's guidance, this signal should override the smuggler's pheromone transmitter, essentially telling any approaching predators to return to their normal territories." "And if it doesn't work?" Vex asked pointedly. "Then we fall back to evacuation and defense," Seralis answered. "But the science is sound. Commander, I believe this is our best option." Vex studied the displays, then the Arcturus, which had settled into a relaxed posture despite the ongoing tests. "Very well. Deploy the counter-signal, but maintain evacuation readiness." The search teams finally located the main transmitter shortly before dawn, a sophisticated device hidden in the hollow of a massive tree just outside the outpost's sensor perimeter. As predicted, it was already active, broadcasting its synthetic pheromones across the surrounding territory. Drone surveillance confirms multiple Arcturus groups moving toward the outpost, a communications officer reported, her voice tense. Estimated 30 individuals, converging from all directions. ETA 45 minutes. "Deploy the countersignal," Vex ordered. Engineers had worked through the night to modify the outpost's communication array to broadcast the countersignal, developed with the captive Arcturus's help. As they activated the system, a subsonic vibration passed through the outpost, felt rather than heard, a deep thrumming that seemed to resonate in the bones. In the containment chamber, the young Arcturus raised its head, multiple eyes blinking in sequence. It made a sound that Mira's modulator translated simply as, "Correct." Tense minutes passed as they monitored the approaching predators through drone feeds and perimeter sensors. The first sign of success came when the closest group of Arcturus suddenly stopped, their sleek forms visible at the edge of the jungle. The massive predators seemed to confer with each other, heads tilting in that characteristic gesture of consideration. Then, to the outpost's collective relief, they turned and melted back into the forest. Similar reports came in from all sides as Arcturus groups retreated, returning to their territories without approaching the outpost. By mid-morning, the crisis had passed. "Remarkable," Vex said, reviewing the final reports. "An ecological disaster averted through communication, rather than force." She turned to Mira. "Your initiative has proven invaluable. Corporal Langston, I will be recommending you for commendation." "Thank you, Commander," Mira replied. "But what about the Arcturus? Now that the crisis is over?" "Dr. Halvix has requested permission to continue studying it," Vex said. "Given the unprecedented nature of its behavior and the potential for further insights, I'm inclined to approve, provided adequate safety measures remain in place." The decision to release the young Arcturus back into the wild came 3 days later, after extensive deliberation among the outpost's scientific and security leadership. The final consensus was that while its behavior was remarkable, keeping a wild predator confined indefinitely raised both ethical and practical concerns. A small expedition team, including Mira, Halvix, and Seralis, escorted the Arcturus to the edge of the outpost's perimeter. No containment fields or restraints were used, just the mutual understanding that had developed between species. "We've attached a non-invasive tracking beacon to monitor its movements," Halvix explained as they walked. "If it remains in the vicinity, we can continue our observations and perhaps further develop our communication methods." Mira nodded, watching the predator move confidently ahead of them, occasionally pausing to mark its path or investigate interesting scents. She had spent hours with it over the past days, refining her modulator's translation capabilities and establishing what Halvix called a proto-linguistic framework for interspecies communication. When they reached the agreed release point, a clearing at the edge of the jungle, the Arcturus stopped and turned to face them. Its multiple eyes scanned each person in turn before settling on Mira. "Well," she said, activating her modulator one last time, "this is where we part ways. Thank you for your help." The device translated her words into the complex mixture of vocalizations and subsonic tones that the predator understood. The Arcturus responded with a sound that the modulator translated as, "Territory shared. Predator alliance maintained." "I think," Halvix said softly, "it's saying it considers this area shared territory now. A remarkable concept for a supposedly non-sentient species." Seralis, who had maintained a professional skepticism throughout the entire affair, studied the predator with new respect. "Perhaps our definitions of sentience need revision." With one final vocalization, untranslatable but somehow conveying a sense of farewell, the Arcturus turned and bounded into the jungle, its adaptive camouflage rendering it nearly invisible within moments. "Will it come back, do you think?" Mira asked, already missing the strange connection they had formed. "I'd be surprised if it didn't," Halvix replied. "We've established something unprecedented here, a bridge between species that's not easily abandoned." The scientist's prediction proved accurate sooner than expected. The very next morning, perimeter sensors detected the Arcturus's tracking signal approaching the outpost. When Mira joined the security team sent to investigate, she found the predator waiting calmly at the edge of the cleared zone around the base, as if reporting for duty. Over the following weeks, a routine developed. The young Arcturus, christened Sable by the base personnel for its midnight dark primary coloration, would patrol the jungle perimeter, occasionally bringing down dangerous fauna that ventured too close to the outpost. It would appear at scheduled times to participate in Halvix's communication experiments, then disappear back into the wild to hunt and explore its territory. Most remarkably, it began to bring specimens to Halvix, unusual plants, small creatures, and once, the partially activated sonic emitter from a new smuggler encampment, leading to another security operation that dismantled the remnants of the criminal group. "It's like having the world's most lethal research assistant," Halvix joked during one of their regular briefings, "and the most effective perimeter guard." Commander Vex was sufficiently impressed to formalize the arrangement. Mira was promoted to squad leader, with her primary responsibility being the development of the Volterra Interspecies Communication Initiative, a project that soon attracted attention from Coalition headquarters. One evening, as Mira conducted her usual perimeter check with Sable, loping silently beside her, she found Lieutenant Seralis waiting at their usual rendezvous point. The Xanthian had become, if not exactly friendly, then at least respectful over the past months. "Patrol report?" he asked, falling into step beside them as they completed the circuit. "All clear," Mira replied. "Sable alerted to some skulk-spine activity in the eastern sector, but they're keeping their distance." Seralis nodded, his four eyes briefly tracking the Arcturus's movements. "The Coalition Science Directorate has approved full funding for the communication initiative," he said after a moment. "They're sending a specialized research team next month." "That's excellent news," Mira replied, though a flicker of concern passed through her. More people meant more variables, more potential for misunderstanding or accidents. Seralis seemed to read her thoughts. "Dr. Halvix insisted that you remain the primary liaison with Sable, and I supported his recommendation." Mira glanced at him in surprise. "You did?" "The evidence is compelling," he replied, with typical Xanthian directness. "The Predator responds to you in a way it doesn't to others. Your judgment regarding its behavior has proven accurate, and your improvisation with the sound modulator saved lives, including mine." His throat flanges expanded slightly, the closest thing to a smile his physiology allowed. "Humans may be new to the Coalition, Corporal Langston, but it seems you have qualities we need." As if understanding the significance of the moment, Sable moved closer, its massive form a shadow at Mira's side. The unlikely trio, human, Xanthian, and Volterran apex predator, continued their patrol under the light of the planet's 3 moons, a living embodiment of the bridges being built between worlds. In her quarters that night, Mira added a third personal touch to her space, a holographic image of Sable, captured during one of their communication sessions. The Predator's multiple eyes focused with that unsettling intelligence that had first captured her attention. Beside it stood the original sound modulator, now retired in favor of more sophisticated equipment. She touched the simple device that had started it all, from unsure recruit to squad leader in less than a year, with the planet's deadliest predator following her like a loyal hound, not the career path she had envisioned when joining the Coalition forces. As if summoned by her thoughts, a familiar subsonic rumble vibrated through the outpost, Sable, communicating from its resting place at the perimeter. The message needed no translation. Territory secure, Predator alliance strong. Mira smiled and sent back a simple acknowledgement through the new communication system. On Volterra 9, under alien stars, humanity had found an unexpected ally, and she, a once overlooked recruit from Earth, had become the bridge between worlds.